When I came back from my trip, a moving truck was parked in front of the house. My son said, "I packed all your things. Go to a nursing home. We need space for my dog." I made one phone call, and he was begging for forgiveness. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I'm 70 years old, and I've seen my share of heartbreak. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found when I returned home from visiting my sister in Florida. The moving truck sitting in my driveway should have been my first clue. Big white with Peterson Moving Services painted on the side in bold blue letters. I sat in my old Honda for a moment, staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I'd been gone for 2 months helping my sister Eleanor recover from her hip surgery. 2 months of sleeping on her uncomfortable guest bed, helping her with physical therapy, cooking her meals, 2 months of missing my own home, my own routine, my own life. But Eleanor needed me, and that's what family does for each other. Or so I thought. My hands trembled as I turned off the engine. The front door of my house opened, and out walked my son, Randall, carrying a box. Behind him came his wife, Nola. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped what looked like my good china. "Randall?" I called out, stepping out of my car. "What's going on here?" He didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. Just set the box down on the truck's ramp and turned to face me with that cold expression I'd seen too many times lately. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, walking over. Nola stayed by the truck, but I could feel her watching us, probably smirking. "Why is there a moving truck in my house?" I asked, my voice already shaking. Deep down, I think I already knew, but my mind refused to accept it. "We found you a place at Sunset Manor," Randall said matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. "It's a nice facility. You'll be much better taken care of there." I felt the blood drain from my face. "A nursing home, Randall? I don't need a nursing home. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "Mom, you're 70. You were gone for 2 months, and anything could have happened. What if you'd fallen? What if you'd had a heart attack? We wouldn't have even known." "But I was helping Eleanor. You knew where I was." Nola finally spoke up, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Beulah, honey, we're just thinking about what's best for you. At your age, you really shouldn't be living alone." I looked back and forth between them, searching for any sign of the son I'd raised, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for. "This is my house, Randall. I've lived here for 43 years. Your father and I bought this house when you were just 2 years old, and we appreciate everything you and Dad did," he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "But we need the space now." "Space for what?" Nola stepped forward, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "We got the most beautiful German Shepherd puppy. His name is Duke, and he's going to be huge. He needs a big yard to run around in, and our apartment just isn't suitable." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "You're putting me in a nursing home for a dog." "It's not just for Duke," Randall said quickly, but I could see the guilt flickering in his eyes. "Mom, you're getting older. This house is too big for you. All these stairs, the yard work, the maintenance, it's too much." I managed just fine. Mrs. Patterson next door helps with the heavy stuff. And I hire Tommy from down the street to mow the lawn. "See, you're already needing help with everything," Nola said, like she'd just proven her point. My legs felt weak. I looked at my house, the house where I'd raised Randall, where I'd nursed my husband through his final illness, where I'd planned to spend my remaining years. The rose bushes I'd planted were blooming beautifully. The porch swing where I read my morning paper was still there, but somehow it already looked foreign to me. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. Randall shifted uncomfortably. "We talked about it while you were gone." "It just makes sense, Mom. You've been in my house for 2 months, going through my things." "We needed to pack your essentials," Nola said. "Don't worry. We've carefully selected everything you'll need at Sunset Manor." I walked toward the truck, looking at the boxes stacked inside. My entire life reduced to cardboard containers. I recognized some of my dishes, a few pieces of furniture, but so much was missing. Where's my china cabinet? My wedding photo from the mantel? Dad's chair? Mom, you won't have room for all that stuff, Randall said. The rooms at Sunset Manor are much smaller. We kept what you'll actually need. I felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart exactly, but something deeper. Something that had been holding me together for 70 years. When do I have to leave? I whispered. The truck's here now, Nola said. We've already paid for your first month at Sunset Manor. Your room is ready. I stood there in my own driveway, looking at the house where I'd been happy, where I'd been loved, where I'd belonged. In a few hours, it would no longer be mine. I would no longer belong anywhere. Can I at least see Duke? I asked, surprising myself. Maybe if I saw this wonderful dog they were so concerned about, I might understand. Nola's face lit up. Oh, he's at the groomer today getting his first professional bath and nail trim. You'll meet him eventually. Eventually. Like I was some distant relative they might visit once in a while. As I watched them load the last of my belongings, I realized that my son had become a stranger, and somehow I'd let it happen. The drive to Sunset Manor felt like a funeral procession. The first 3 weeks at Sunset Manor were the darkest of my life. I barely left my room, existing on the bland meals they brought to my door, and staring out the window at the parking lot below. Everything hurt. My back from the narrow bed, my heart from the betrayal, my soul from the complete loss of everything I'd known. The other residents tried to include me in their activities, but I couldn't bring myself to care about bingo or craft time. What was the point? My own son had thrown me away like garbage. Nothing mattered anymore. Then Margaret arrived. I was lying in bed at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, still in my nightgown. When the door opened, a woman about my age walked in, dragging a large suitcase behind her. She had silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and the most determined expression I'd ever seen. Well, she said, looking around the small room with its 2 single beds. I guess we're roommates.
I'm Margaret Sullivan.
I managed a weak smile. Beulah Henderson. Margaret set her suitcase on the empty bed and turned to really look at me. You've been crying, she said matter-of-factly. It wasn't a question, and I didn't deny it. My son put me here, took my house for his dog. Margaret nodded knowingly. Family betrayal. I'm here because my daughter-in-law convinced my son that I was becoming difficult to manage. Apparently, asking questions about where my late husband's life insurance money went makes me difficult. Despite everything, I found myself sitting up. What do you mean? Margaret began unpacking with efficient movements. I'm a retired lawyer, Beulah. 45 years of practice. When my husband died last year, there should have been a substantial life insurance payout. Instead, my son claimed there were complications, and only a small amount came through. When I asked to see the paperwork, suddenly I was suffering from dementia and needed supervised care. She pulled out a thick file folder and set it on her nightstand. The thing about being a lawyer is you never really retire. You just get more selective about your cases. Are you investigating your own son? I'm protecting my own interests. Margaret corrected something you might want to consider doing. I shook my head. There's nothing to investigate. Randall was honest about what he wanted. My house for his dog. Margaret paused in her unpacking and fixed me with a sharp stare. Beulah, whose name is on the deed to your house? Mine, of course. It was mine and my husband's. And when Robert died, it became just mine. And your son just assumed he could move you out and move himself in? When she put it like that, it did sound rather presumptuous. He said I needed care. Do you need care? I thought about it honestly. I was managing fine. I mean, I'm not as spry as I used to be. But I was taking care of my sister in Florida for 2 months. If I can take care of someone else, I can certainly take care of myself. Margaret sat down on her bed facing me. Beulah, in my experience, when family members rush elderly relatives into care facilities while taking control of their homes, there is usually more to the story. What do you mean? Has your son ever asked about your will, your finances, whether you've made any provisions for long-term care? I frowned, trying to remember. He asked a few months ago if I'd considered what would happen to the house when I die. He said he wanted to make sure everything was taken care of. And what did you tell him? That the house would go to him? Naturally, he's my only child. Margaret nodded slowly. So, he knows he'll inherit the house eventually. The question is, why couldn't he wait? That stung. Maybe he just wanted me to be safe. Maybe, Margaret agreed. Or maybe he wanted the house now while he could enjoy it. How old is your son, Beulah? 48. Old enough to have his own life, his own home. Old enough to wait for his inheritance, like the rest of us had to do. Margaret leaned forward. Tell me, did he ever offer to move in with you? Hire a home health aide. Install one of those medical alert systems. I realized that no, he hadn't. None of those options had been discussed. It was straight from mom needs help to mom needs to be in a nursing home. The house must be worth a fair amount, Margaret mused. 43 years of ownership probably paid off. Oh yes, Robert and I paid it off years ago, and the neighborhood has really improved. The realtor who sent me Christmas cards every year always said it was worth around $300,000. Margaret's eyebrows shot up. 300,000? Beulah, that's serious money. Enough to change someone's life significantly. I never thought of it that way. To me, it was just home, the place where I belonged. Tell me about this dog, Margaret said. Duke, a German Shepherd puppy. Nola, that's my daughter-in-law, said he needed a big yard. German Shepherds are expensive dogs, especially if they're bought from a breeder. Could cost several thousand. Several thousand. I couldn't hide my shock. For a dog, if it's a show-quality puppy with papers, absolutely. Plus training, veterinary care, premium food. We're talking about a serious financial commitment. I thought about Randall's job at the insurance company. He made decent money, but not enough for such extravagances. At least not the Randall I thought I knew. Margaret, I said slowly. Do you think they planned this? While I was gone, I think, Margaret said carefully, that you might want to find out exactly what's been happening with your property while you've been here. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. You know, Beulah, the thing about nursing homes is that once you're in one, people assume you're helpless. They stop consulting you about decisions. They start making assumptions about your mental capacity. What are you saying? Margaret turned back to me, and I saw the lawyer she used to be in her eyes. I'm saying that being in here doesn't make you powerless. You still own that house. You still have rights. And if your son thinks he can just take over your life because it's convenient for him, well, he's got another thing coming. For the first time in 3 weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt angry. What do you think I should do? Margaret smiled. And it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd spent 45 years fighting for people who'd been wronged. First, we're going to find out exactly what your son has been up to in your house. Then we're going to remind him that his mother isn't dead yet. Margaret wasted no time. The next morning, she marched me down to the nursing home's business office like a woman on a mission. I'd barely had my coffee, but she was already dressed and ready, that thick file folder tucked under her arm. We need to use your computer, she told the receptionist, a young woman named Jessica, who looked startled by Margaret's authoritative tone. I'm sorry, but residents aren't typically allowed to. We're not typical residents, Margaret interrupted. I'm a retired attorney helping my friend with some legal matters. Surely you have some provision for residents who need to access public records. Jessica glanced nervously at the computer, then at us, then at the supervisor's empty office. I suppose I could let you use it for a few minutes, but I'll need to stay here with you. Perfect, Margaret said, settling into the chair with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in a courtroom. I watched in amazement as Margaret's fingers flew across the keyboard. Within minutes, she'd pulled up the county assessor's website and typed in my address. Let's see what we're dealing with here, she muttered, scrolling through the information that appeared on the screen. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the numbers. My house, which I'd always thought was worth around $300,000, was now assessed at $450,000. $450,000? I whispered. How is that possible? Margaret was already clicking on another link. Property values have been rising steadily in your neighborhood, Beulah. Look at this. Houses on your street have been selling for even more than the assessed value. She pulled up recent sales records. The house 3 doors down from mine had sold 6 months ago for $500,000. Another house on my block had gone for $475,000 just last month. Your son stands to inherit a very valuable piece of property, Margaret said grimly, much more valuable than you realized. Jessica, who'd been pretending not to listen, leaned forward slightly. Wow, that's a lot of money for a house. It certainly is, Margaret agreed. Jessica, would you mind printing this information for us? While Jessica printed the property records, Margaret continued typing. Now, let's see what else we can find. Beulah, you said your son has been living in your house for 3 weeks now. That's right. Since the day they moved me in here. Margaret pulled up the local newspaper website and searched for something. After a few minutes, she found what she was looking for in the classified ad section. Room for rent, she read aloud. Beautiful 3-bedroom house, large yard, quiet neighborhood, $2,000 per month, plus utilities. My blood ran cold. That's my address. Your son is renting out rooms in your house, Margaret said, her voice tight with controlled anger. While you're sitting in here eating cafeteria food and sleeping on a narrow bed. I felt dizzy. He can't do that. It's my house. Legally, you're absolutely right. But practically speaking, if you're not there to stop him, and if people assume you've moved permanently into care, he can get away with quite a lot. Jessica handed us the printed pages, and Margaret studied them carefully. Beulah, I need to ask you something important. Have you given your son power of attorney?
No.
Robert and I talked about it years ago, but we never got around to it.
Good.
That means he has no legal authority to make decisions about your property. Margaret looked at me seriously. But he's acting like he does. We spent the rest of the morning in the nursing home's small library, where Margaret explained things I'd never thought about. Property rights, tenant law, the difference between guardianship and power of attorney. The bottom line, she said, is that your house is still your house. Your son is essentially squatting in it and illegally subletting rooms. But what can I do? I'm stuck in here. Margaret's eyes gleamed. Oh, honey, you're not stuck anywhere. You chose to come here because your son told you to, but you can choose to leave any time you want. Leave? The idea had never occurred to me, but Randall said a lot of things, none of them legally binding. Margaret leaned forward. Beulah, you're not here by court order. You're not here because a doctor declared you incompetent. You're here because your son convinced you it was necessary. Well, now you know it wasn't. That afternoon, Margaret helped me make a phone call to Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor. I hadn't spoken to her since I'd been moved to Sunset Manor, and I was nervous about what she might tell me. Pulla, Mrs. Patterson's voice was warm but concerned. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. How are you settling in at that place? I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson.
But I wanted to ask you about something.
Have you noticed anything unusual at my house? There was a pause. Well, there's been a lot of activity over there. Your son and his wife moved in, of course, but then there were other people, too. Strangers coming and going. I wasn't sure if I should say anything. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. What kind of strangers? Young people, mostly. College age. They've been carrying boxes and furniture into the house, and that dog of theirs barks all night. I've had to close my bedroom windows because of the noise. Margaret was taking notes, her expression growing darker by the minute. Mrs. Patterson, I said carefully, did Randall ever mention that I might be coming back home? Coming back? Oh no, dear. He told me you decided to move permanently into assisted living. Said you were much happier there and didn't want to deal with the house anymore. After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand.
I'm sorry, Beulah.
I know this is hard to hear. He told her I was happy here, that I didn't want to deal with my own house anymore. He's been telling a lot of people a lot of things. Apparently, Margaret showed me her notes. Based on what your neighbor said, it sounds like he's renting rooms to multiple tenants. At $2,000 each, if he's got 3 or 4 renters, he could be making $6,000 to $8,000 a month. The numbers made my head spin. From my house, from your house. While you're paying $3,000 a month to stay here, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Margaret, I can't afford to stay here much longer. I've been using my savings, but at $3,000 a month. How much do you have left? Maybe enough for 2 more months. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, Beulah, what did you think would happen when your money ran out? I've been trying not to think about that. I assumed Randall would help. Or maybe I'd have to apply for Medicaid. And where did you think you'd live if you couldn't afford this place? The truth hit me like a physical blow. I never considered that Randall might not take me back. In my mind, the nursing home was temporary just until I got used to the idea of needing help. But if he was making thousands of dollars renting out my house, why would he want his mother back? He never intended for me to come home, I whispered. Margaret nodded grimly. I don't think he did. That evening, as we sat in our room after dinner, Margaret pulled out a legal pad and began writing. What are you doing? I asked. Making a plan, she said without looking up. Your son thinks he's outsmarted you, Beulah. He thinks you're just a helpless old woman who will do whatever he tells her to do. She looked up at me, and I saw steel in her eyes. Tomorrow, we're going to prove him wrong. Margaret's plan was brilliant in its simplicity. The next morning, she called a real estate attorney she'd known for years. Someone who specialized in property disputes. David, it's Margaret Sullivan. I need a favor for a friend, she said into the phone, pacing around our small room like a caged tiger. I have a 70-year-old woman whose son has essentially stolen her house while she's in temporary care. I listened as Margaret explained my situation with the precision of someone who'd spent decades building legal cases. When she hung up, she was smiling. David's going to help us, she said. He's preparing a cease and desist letter for your son, demanding that he stop renting out your property and return possession to you immediately. But where would I live if I left here? The question had been keeping me awake at night. In your own house, of course. But Randall said I couldn't manage on my own. Margaret sat down beside me on my narrow bed. Beulah, honey, you've been managing your own life for 70 years. You spent 2 months taking care of your sister in Florida. You drove yourself there and back. Does that sound like someone who needs to be in a nursing home? When she put it that way, it seemed obvious, but the fear was still there, planted by weeks of being told I was helpless. What if something happens to me? What if I fall or get sick? What if something happens to anyone? Margaret countered. Your son could get hit by a car tomorrow. That neighbor of yours, Mrs. Patterson, could have a heart attack next week. Living alone doesn't mean you're going to die alone. And living with people doesn't guarantee you'll be safe. That afternoon, Margaret and I took a field trip. She'd arranged for her attorney friend David to pick us up and drive us by my house. I hadn't been back since the day I was forced to leave, and my heart pounded as we turned onto my street. The first thing I noticed was the cars. 4 cars parked in my driveway and 2 more on the street in front of my house. David pulled over across the street, and we sat there watching. That's a lot of cars for a family of 2 and a dog, Margaret observed. As we watched, a young man came out of my front door carrying a laundry basket. He walked around to the back of the house, where I could see my old clothesline was now heavy with unfamiliar clothes. He's using my clothesline, I said, feeling strangely violated. That's the least of it, David said grimly. He'd been taking photos with his phone. Margaret told me what's been happening. But seeing it like this, Mrs. Henderson, your son has turned your family home into a boarding house. Another young person emerged from the house, this one carrying a grocery bag. Then another and another. How many people are living in there? I whispered. At least 4 tenants, plus your son and daughter-in-law, David said. Maybe more. I thought about my house, trying to imagine how they'd arranged it. The living room where Robert and I used to watch the evening news. Where Randall had played with his toy trucks as a little boy. Was it now someone's bedroom? What about my sewing room where I'd made Randall's Halloween costumes and mended his school clothes for years? This has to be violating housing codes, Margaret said. Single-family homes aren't zoned for this kind of rental activity. David nodded. I'll make some calls tomorrow. But first, we need to establish Mrs. Henderson's right to reclaim her property. We drove around the block and came back from the other direction. This time, I saw Nola in my front yard with Duke, the German Shepherd puppy who'd supposedly needed my big backyard. Except he wasn't a puppy anymore. He was nearly full-grown, and he was chained to a post that had been driven into my front lawn. That dog is chained up, I said, feeling sick. So much for needing room to run, Margaret said coldly. As we watched, Nola went back inside, leaving Duke alone in the yard. A few minutes later, the dog began barking, and one of the tenants came out and yelled at him to be quiet. "This is what they destroyed your life for," Margaret said, "a chained dog and rental income." David drove us back to Sunset Manor, but not before stopping at his office to let me sign the necessary paperwork. The cease and desist letter would be served to Randall the next day, demanding that he vacate my property within 30 days. "What if he refuses?"
I asked.
"Then we'll file for an unlawful detainer action," David explained. "Essentially, we'll have him evicted from your house." "Can we do that? Even though he's my son?" "Mrs. Henderson, the law doesn't care about family relationships when it comes to property rights. Your house is your house. Period." That evening, Margaret helped me pack the few belongings I'd brought to Sunset Manor. It wasn't much, mostly clothes and a few personal items that Randall and Nola had deemed essential. "Where's your jewelry?" Margaret asked, noticing that I was only packing a simple watch and my wedding ring. "I don't know. I asked Nola about my jewelry box, and she said they'd put it somewhere safe." Margaret's jaw tightened. "We'll add that to the list of things we're recovering." As I folded my clothes, I found myself thinking about all the things I'd lost. Not just the valuable items, but the sentimental ones. The photo albums chronicling Randall's childhood, my mother's china set, the quilt my grandmother had made, Robert's tools in the garage. "Margaret," I said quietly, "what if they've sold things or thrown them away?" "Then they'll replace them or compensate you for them," she said firmly. "Beulah, your son committed theft. Just because he's family doesn't make it legal." I'd never thought of it that way before. In my mind, family disagreements were just that, disagreements. But Margaret was right. Randall had taken my house, my belongings, my life, without my permission. That wasn't a family dispute. That was theft. The next morning, I checked myself out of Sunset Manor. The staff seemed surprised but didn't try to stop me. After all, I wasn't there involuntarily. Margaret came with me, having decided that her own son's nursing home plans could wait while she helped me reclaim my life. "Where are we going?" I asked as we climbed into David's car with our suitcases. "To a hotel," Margaret said, "just for a few days until we can get you back into your house." "A hotel? I can't afford that." "You can afford it better than you can afford to stay in that nursing home," Margaret pointed out. "Besides, David knows a place that gives senior discounts." As we drove away from Sunset Manor, I realized something. For the first time in a month, I felt like myself again. Not like a burden, not like someone who needed to be managed or taken care of, just like Beulah Henderson, a woman who owned a house and had every right to live in it. My phone rang as we pulled into the hotel parking lot. I looked at the caller ID and felt my stomach clench. "Randall, he got the letter," Margaret said with satisfaction. "Answer it. Let's hear what he has to say now." I stared at my phone as it rang, Randall's name flashing on the screen. My hands were shaking, but Margaret nodded encouragingly. "Answer it," she whispered. "You have the power now." I pressed the accept button with a trembling finger. "Hello, Randall." "Mom, what the hell is this?" His voice was furious. Nothing like the calm, reasonable tone he'd used when he'd put me in the nursing home. "Some lawyer just served me papers saying I have to get out of your house. This is insane." "It's my house, Randall. I never gave you permission to rent it out. You're in a nursing home. You don't need the house anymore." "I'm not in a nursing home anymore. I checked myself out this morning." There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was different.
Panicked.
"Mom, you can't just leave like that. You need supervision. You could hurt yourself." "I've been taking care of myself for 70 years. Randall, I think I can manage." "Where are you staying?" "You can't go back to the house. There are people living there now." "I know exactly who's living there. For renters paying you $2,000 each plus you and Nola. That's $8,000 a month you've been making from my property." Another silence. "Mom, listen. We can work this out. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me." I heard him take a deep breath. The house needed work. The roof was leaking. The furnace was making noises. We had to put money into it to keep it from falling apart. The renters are helping us cover those costs. Margaret was furiously scribbling notes and shaking her head. She wrote "lies" in big letters and showed it to me. Randall, I had the roof repaired 2 years ago, and the furnace was serviced just before I left for Florida. Well, there were other issues, and anyway, the renters are students. They needed housing, and we were helping them out. While helping yourselves to $8,000 a month, it's not that simple. His voice was rising. Mom, you have no idea how expensive everything is now. Nola lost her job last month, and my hours got cut at the insurance company. We needed the income. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy. My son was struggling financially. That was something I could understand. But then I remembered the nursing home bills, the way they dismissed my concerns, the complete lack of respect for my wishes. So, you decided to solve your financial problems by stealing my house. I didn't steal anything. You're my mother. When you die, the house comes to me anyway. I'm just managing it early. The callousness of that statement took my breath away. When I die, Randall, I'm not dead. I'm not even sick. But you're old, Mom. You could die anytime. Car accident, heart attack, stroke. At least this way, I'm making sure the house is being taken care of. Margaret grabbed the phone from my hand. This is Margaret Sullivan, Mrs. Henderson's legal advisor. You have 30 days to vacate the property and return all of Mrs. Henderson's belongings, as specified in the cease and desist order. Who the hell are you? Randall's voice was loud enough that I could hear it clearly. I'm a retired attorney who's seen plenty of sons like you. You're not the first person to think they could manipulate an elderly parent out of their home. This is none of your business. It became my business when your mother asked for my help. Now you can either comply with the legal notice or we can proceed with formal eviction proceedings. Your choice. Margaret handed the phone back to me. Randall was sputtering with rage. Mom, you can't let some stranger turn you against your own family. My family turned me against my family, I said quietly. Margaret is just helping me stand up for myself. This is ridiculous. You can't throw us out on the street. You threw me out for a dog, I reminded him. A dog that's now chained in my front yard. By the way, Duke needs exercise. Duke needs a new home along with your 4 renters and you. I could hear Nola in the background, her voice shrill with panic. Then Randall came back on the line. Mom, let's meet somewhere and talk about this like adults. Just you and me.
No lawyers.
Margaret was shaking her head vigorously, but I found myself considering it. Maybe if I could make Randall understand how much he'd hurt me, he'd realize what he'd done wrong. Okay, I said. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock at Denny's on Route 9. Good. And Mom, don't bring the lawyer. After I hung up, Margaret looked at me with disappointment. Beulah, that man is going to try to manipulate you. I know, but I need to look him in the eye and tell him how this has made me feel. Maybe he'll understand. And if he doesn't, then at least I'll know I tried. The next morning, I arrived at Denny's 15 minutes early and chose a booth where I could see the parking lot. Margaret had wanted to come with me, but I'd insisted on going alone. Some conversations needed to happen between just a mother and her son. Randall arrived exactly on time, but he didn't come in immediately. I watched him sit in his car for several minutes talking on his phone, probably to Nola, getting his story straight. When he finally came inside, I was shocked by how tired he looked. His hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled. The confident man who'd evicted me from my own home looked like he hadn't slept in days. Hi, Mom, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. Hello, Randall. For a moment, we just looked at each other. This was my son, the baby I'd nursed through fevers and nightmares, the boy I'd cheered for at Little League games, the young man I'd been so proud of when he graduated college. When had he become this stranger? Mom, I'm sorry, he said finally. I know this whole thing has been hard on you. Hard on me. I kept my voice level. Randall, you took my house. You took my belongings. You told everyone I was happy to be in a nursing home when you knew I was miserable. I thought it was for the best. No, you thought it was convenient. There's a difference. He ran his hands through his hair. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Nola's been talking about leaving me if we don't get our financial situation figured out. My job is hanging by a thread. The house was just sitting there empty while you were in Florida. It wasn't empty. It was waiting for me to come home. But you were gone for 2 months. How was I supposed to know you were coming back? I stared at him because I told you I was helping Eleanor recover from surgery. Because I called you every week. Because that's what temporary means. Randall shifted uncomfortably. Look, maybe I made some mistakes, but we can fix this. You can move back in. We'll make room. Make room in my own house. The renters have lease agreements. We can't just kick them out. But there's the guest room. The guest room in my own house. It would just be temporary until we figure something else out. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Even now, even after being caught, he still thought I would accept being a guest in my own home. Randall, I said softly. Do you love me? The question seemed to surprise him. Of course, I love you, Mom. You're my mother. Then why did you hurt me so badly? He was quiet for a long time. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just needed the house. And there it was. The truth. Simple and devastating. He needed the house more than he needed me to be happy. I stood up, leaving a $5 bill on the table for my coffee. 30 days, Randall. That's what the legal notice says.
Mom, wait.
But I was already walking away. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. As I reached the door, I heard him call out one last time. Mom, please. I'm begging you. But it was too late for begging. It was time for consequences. 30 days passed like a storm clearing. Randall tried calling me dozens of times in the first week, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. He tried guilt, anger, bargaining, and finally threats. He said he'd contest the eviction, that he'd claim I was mentally incompetent, that no judge would side with me over my own son. Margaret just smiled and added each voicemail to her evidence file. Let him try, she said. We have documentation of his illegal rental operation, witness statements from your neighbor about the disruption he's caused, and photos of the property damage. By the third week, the call stopped. David, our attorney, reported that Randall had hired his own lawyer and was attempting to negotiate, but the legal facts were clear. I own the house. I had never given him permission to rent it out. He had to leave. On day 29, I got a text message from an unknown number. Your stuff is on the front porch. Hope you're happy. Margaret and I drove to my house that afternoon with a U-Haul truck David had helped us rent. I hadn't been back since that day we'd driven by to see what Randall was doing. My heart pounded as we turned onto my street. The house looked different, not just because there were boxes and furniture piled on the front porch, but because it looked smaller somehow, less like home and more like just another house. Mrs. Patterson came hurrying over the moment she saw me step out of the truck. Beulah, oh, thank goodness you're back. She hugged me tightly.
I was so worried about you.
That son of yours told everyone you'd moved permanently into care, but I never believed it. I'm home now, I said, surprising myself with how good those words felt. And not a moment too soon, Mrs. Patterson said grimly. The noise from all those young people, the parties, the music at all hours, and that poor dog barking constantly. I called the city about the zoning violations.
You know, you did.
Single-family homes aren't supposed to be boarding houses. The inspector came out last week and issued citations. Margaret was already examining the boxes on my porch, taking inventory. Beulah, come look at this. I walked over to see her holding up a photograph that had been carelessly tossed into a box with kitchen utensils. It was my wedding photo. The glass was cracked, and the frame was bent. They didn't even have the decency to pack things properly, Margaret said, her voice tight with anger. We spent the next 4 hours going through the boxes and furniture piled on my porch. Some of my belongings were there, but many were missing. My grandmother's quilt was nowhere to be found. Neither was my jewelry box, my mother's china, or Robert's tools. We'll send David a list of everything that's missing, Margaret said. They'll have to account for every item or replace it. As we carried boxes into the house, I prepared myself for what I might find inside, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality. My beautiful home, the place I'd lovingly maintained for 43 years, looked like a college dormitory. The hardwood floors I'd polished every week were scuffed and stained. There were holes in the walls where posters had been hung and torn down. My kitchen counters were burned and scratched. In the living room, where Robert and I had shared quiet evenings reading and watching television, someone had built a makeshift bar area. Empty beer bottles were lined up on the windowsill. "Oh, honey," Margaret said softly, seeing my face. I walked through each room, cataloging the damage. My bedroom had been turned into a dormitory-style space with 3 single beds crammed in. The bathroom upstairs had a broken mirror and a sink that had been caulked so many times it looked like abstract art. But the worst was my sewing room. My beautiful organized space where I'd created so many memories had been stripped bare. The built-in shelves Robert had installed for my fabric and supplies were empty. Even the sewing machine was gone. I sat down on one of the remaining chairs and cried. Not the desperate, hopeless tears I'd shed at Sunset Manor, but angry tears. Tears for what had been lost, what had been destroyed, what could never be restored. Margaret sat beside me and took my hand. "We'll fix it," she said firmly. "All of it. Every scuff mark, every hole in the wall, every missing item, and Randall is going to pay for every penny of it over the next several weeks." That's exactly what happened. David filed a lawsuit against Randall for property damage and theft. The list of missing and damaged items totaled over $30,000. Randall's lawyer tried to negotiate, but Margaret was relentless. "He stole from his own mother," she told me. "Let him face the consequences." The settlement came through 2 months later. Randall would pay for all damages and replace all missing items. He would also pay my legal fees and 3 months of hotel costs while the house was being repaired. I never heard from him directly again. All communication went through lawyers. Part of me grieved for the relationship we'd lost, but a bigger part of me felt relief. I was finally free from the obligation to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. Margaret decided not to go back to her own son's house. "If he wants to see me," she said, "he knows where to find me." She rented a small apartment 2 blocks from my house, and we became the family we'd chosen rather than the families we'd been born into. The house renovations took 3 months. I had the hardwood floors refinished, the walls repainted, and the kitchen completely redone. When it was finished, it looked better than it had in years. On the day I officially moved back in, Mrs. Patterson brought over a casserole and a bottle of wine. "Welcome home," she said. "For real this time." That evening, as I sat in my restored living room with Margaret, I thought about everything that had happened. 6 months ago, I'd been a lonely widow living quietly in her family home. Then I'd been a discarded mother warehoused in a nursing home while my son profited from my property. Now I was something else entirely. I was a woman who'd fought back, a woman who'd stood up for herself, a woman who'd learned that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. My phone rang and I glanced at the caller ID. For a moment, my heart stopped. It was Randall. Margaret looked at me questioningly. "Are you going to answer it?" I thought about it for a long moment. Then I reached over and turned the phone off. "No," I said. "I don't think I am. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. And some second chances aren't worth the price they demand." I was home now, really home, and I intended to stay that way. Outside, the sun was setting over the neighborhood I'd lived in for 43 years. The roses I'd planted were blooming again, having survived both winter and abandonment. Like me, they'd found a way to flourish despite everything that had tried to destroy them. Margaret raised her wine glass. "To new beginnings," she said. "To coming home," I replied. And for the first time in months, I truly meant it. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.